Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Slay It, where we dare to dream big. So, you may notice I have a bit of a different background today, and the reason for that is because I recently just moved to Boston from New Orleans. And so, our apartment is a bit of a clutter right now because our movers just came yesterday and they moved our stuff into our apartment. So, everything's kind of a bit all over the place. So this is just a bit of a makeshift temporary setup. And so what I wanted to do in this video was kind of tell you guys my journey so far in Boston, my first week in Boston, and kind of specifically the opportunities I've had so far to help out the community and make a difference in the community. So I guess I'll start off by telling you guys what happened the day right after I flew in to Boston. So me and my parents, we were kind of just walking around the neighborhood, checking out what the place had to offer, the different shops, the different restaurants, the different bars. And so we passed by this garden of some sort that had some sort of walkway going through it. And we saw people sitting around a picnic table just conversing. And so we decided to go up to them and kind of ask what this was all about. And so the man there, he introduced himself as Joel, and he explained the mission of this organization called Eastie Farm, educating communities on sustainable food systems. My dad, who was a sustainability consultant, he immediately expressed interest in Eastie Farm. In fact, all of us did. We were like, we want to learn more about this. We want to learn about how to get involved in it. And so Joel invited us to this climate action planning meeting that was happening that upcoming Tuesday. And so we were all really excited to kind of go to it and kind of just jump right in to what Boston had to offer. And so I remember when we were walking away, my dad told me something that really stuck with me. This is why we moved to Boston. The next day, I emailed Kannan Thiruvengadam, who's the executive director of Eastie Farm. And so, not gonna lie, I was a little bit nervous. So, the previous day, I literally just found out about Eastie Farm, and I was already emailing the guy who founded the whole organization. So, I was a little bit nervous and a little bit like unnerved. But I guess all I could do at that moment was just wait for him to respond. And eventually he did respond, and he offered to meet up at some point. And at that time, I didn't realize it, but I realize now that all these opportunities I got right now would never have happened if I hadn't got in touch with him. And so one of these opportunities was in the first email he sent to me. He invited me to a fruit tree planting event with this other local organization called Tree Eastie, just 2 minutes from my house. So I was initially hesitant about this whole thing. I felt like I wouldn't really fit in there, you know? I felt like I'd be a drop of unfamiliarity in a sea of experience. But I decided to go just because I figured, hey, I might be able to learn something. These people might be very accepting, and I might get something from the whole thing. However, he texted me 20 minutes before I was about to leave for the event, and this made my stomach turn upside down. He invited me to attend a climate panel at WBUR City Space. This kind of like concert venue or festival venue that was very close to Boston University, and I was ecstatic. I immediately had so many questions about the whole thing, like when was it going to happen? Who were the panelists? Was I going to be one of the panelists? But I remembered I was going to plan to ask him all these questions, but one thing was certain in my mind. I was going to that panel because I realized just how much I could learn from that panel, not just about Eastie Farm, but about Boston and its sustainable food systems in general and how people are going to achieve that mission. And I figured if I'm going to have presence in the Boston area, I need to know a lot about these various uh climate change issues, with sustainable food systems being one of them. So I went to the tree planting event, and there were a lot of people there, and I got to talk to quite a few of them. I got to meet Bill Masterson, who was the founder of Tree Eastie, and I kind of got to discuss with him and a lot of other people who were there about how I just moved to Boston, about how I wanted to kind of find out about the various opportunities in the area for me to get involved. And it was just a great time where I was able to interact with so many people. I also got to interact with Kannan as well, and I kind of told him about the same things that I told the other people. And yeah, it was just a great time. We got to interact with so many people, and I got to know that this was a really tightly knit community that I could really fit into and make a huge difference in. However, eventually it was time to go to the climate panel, but first, Gunnan and I stopped at the greenhouse, the Eastie Farm geothermal greenhouse, to pick up some lettuce. And so I was like, what are we doing here? Why are we picking up lettuce for a climate panel? And Kannan told me the reason that he was doing that was because he didn't want to just talk for the whole time because he figured that was gonna get boring quick and he knew people wouldn't want to listen to that for a ridiculously long time. So he wanted to bring something with him so that it would just be like him talking, but it would be a very interactive experience as well, and people would get to see firsthand what Eastie Farm is growing and how they are making a difference in the East Boston community. And so while we were there, we met Mary, who was one of the volunteers for Eastie Farm, and she was just there tending to the plants, watering the plants in and around the greenhouse. And I talked to her about how I just moved to Boston, how she got involved in Eastie Farm, how I want to get more involved in Eastie Farm. And it was great. We just got to learn about each other and our backgrounds. However, it was time for us to leave the greenhouse and go to the climate panel, and boy, was it something else. So, I got backstage with Kannan and I got to talk to all of the panelists there, and I realized these people knew a lot about their craft. They knew a lot about sustainable food systems, which was the topic of the climate panel. So, to give you some context on just who these people were, one of them was an Indigenous Chefs Group member, one of them was an organic management specialist, and one of them was the founder of a dumpling company and a restaurant consulting service. And so while they were discussing backstage like different talking points and they were interacting with each other about their backgrounds and kind of like where each of them came from, I realized that this was going to be one heck of a panel just because of how much each people knew about this subject. They weren't just going to be talking some fluff and like pretending they knew a lot about the subject when in reality they knew absolutely nothing about it. These people were genuine and they knew so much about sustainable food systems and how we can achieve that in today's society. So eventually the panel discussion did start, and some of the topics that were discussed in the panel were food waste, composting, climate action, and even guilty pleasures. So overall, it was a very comical and a very engaging discussion. But no matter the question, I was always kept on the edge of my seat, awaiting the next thing they were going to say, just because of how engaging and interesting and how much knowledge I was gaining from the whole experience. And so after the panel, I got to talk to some more of the panelists and some of the other audience members and kind of tell them about myself, how I just moved to Boston, what other climate initiatives I was involved in New Orleans. And Kandan handed out his lettuce and carrots, and we even took a pretty funny photo of all of us eating a carrot, and I might put that down in the description, or I might overlay this footage right now so you guys can see it for yourself. However, this was not the only opportunity I got. No, no, no. So the next day, I got an email from Tree Eastie about how some people were going to meet up in Central Square to plant 8 fruit trees across East Boston. And so I thought to myself, since that first opportunity and accepting it got me so far, why don't I just accept this one as well? I'm sure it'll get me so far as well, and I'll be able to learn so much about this subject as much as it did about the sustainable food systems as well. So I headed over to Central Square and I got to meet a lot of people from Tree Eastie there. Of course, Bill was there, but I also got to meet Carlos, who was a member of Tree Eastie, Kara, who's another member of Tree Eastie, and Ed, who's actually going to his first ever tree planting, kind of like me. So it was really comforting to know that I wasn't the only newbie there planting their first ever tree. And so from there, we went around Boston to Eagle Hill, Jeffries Point, Orion Heights, and it was a really, really great experience because it wasn't just them just lecturing to me about how to plant a tree and about the different extraneous measures you have to undergo in order to plant the perfect tree, but it was hands-on learning and it was so engaging and I learned so much because I grasped the concepts so much better when rather than them just talking to me about it, I was able to do it myself. And I feel like they did a really great job of that kind of experiential learning throughout the whole experience. And we also got to have cake as well. So that was another thing that made it very fun and very memorable as well. So the next day was a bit more of a normal day, kind of just a day for me to learn about what normally happens at Eastie Farm on just your normal Monday or normal weekday. So I headed over to the geothermal greenhouse and I got to learn about how it works, what crops they grow in and around the greenhouse, and about the mural they had there actually. There was somebody painting a mural on two cargo containers right there. And they were going to unveil this mural at the summer solstice. And so I immediately thought to myself, I have to go to this unveiling. It's going to be so epic. And I also got to meet Michaela, who was a newly hired project manager. And it was pretty funny. So when I was talking to her and I asked her, how long have you been at Eastie Farm for? She was like, um, about 2 hours. And so I was like, wow, that was unexpected. And so we got to talk to each other about her bizarre work experience, how I just moved to Boston, and about how we were each very interested in the various climate initiatives that were offered by Eastie Farm and other environmental organizations in the area. And it was just a great time for me to be able to just learn about a normal day at Eastie Farm. However, the next day completely flipped things around. So Kannan asked me if I wanted to go with other Eastie Farm staff members to this farm in Concord, Massachusetts called Gaining Ground. And so I immediately said yes. I was like, this could be the opportunity for me to learn about what happens in a bigger, more large scale farm rather than a smaller urban farm. So we arrived at Gaining Ground and they immediately gave us all a tour. And it was really, really great because Gaining Ground is an organic farm. And I got to learn about how you don't need pesticide or fertilizers in order to farm food effectively because I remember there's this one particular plant they told us about. It goes by various names, but they called it sweet Alyssa. And basically what it does is it prevents caterpillars from eating the tomato plants that they grow there. So it kind of like I don't know, it kind of decomposes the caterpillars somehow if they try to get close to the tomato plants. There's a lot of nuance in the process, so I suggest you go and look it up. But that was just one of the many examples of how you don't need pesticides or fertilizers in order to farm food effectively and farm a lot of it. And I also got to learn about their food donation programs and about how they give away a lot of their food for free to various food organizations in and around the Massachusetts area. And one of those organizations was actually Eastie Farm. So they get some of their produce from Gaining Ground, which they kind of distribute to the Boston community. And at the end, I once again got to engage in another experiential learning opportunity, harvesting carrots. And it wasn't just us bending over, just plucking carrots out the ground for an hour and like with no fun or anything. I once again got to socialize with so many people there, and I got to learn about how they got involved in Eastie Farm, and I told them about my background as well. So overall, it was a really fun experience that allowed me to truly understand the inner workings of an organic farm. But however, the day's activities did not end there. So in the evening, me and my family went to the climate action planning meeting that Joelle invited us to on Thursday. And there were various tables there, and we each got to discuss kind of issues, climate issues that were exclusive to East Boston that we think should be taken care of by the city. So one of them, this was a huge one, was airport emissions. Because if you do like you, as you may or may not know, Boston Logan International Airport is located in East Boston. So airport emissions is one of the huge climate issues that East Boston is being affected by. And yet another one that we talked about was composting challenges and how the process can get a little bit muddled. Like people might not know how to compost, or they might not know about like opportunities where they can drop their food waste off at their curb and people will come and pick it up. We discussed how a lot of people might not know about that, and the city should do a better job of incentivizing that. And this last topic, although not like very widely discussed, to me it was very interesting because I never heard of it before. It was about the bike people versus the car people, and about how the city kind of builds their transportation infrastructure, such as sidewalks or roads or like bike paths around that sort of model. And we discussed like how they think of it as bike people versus car people, when in reality, people are not a bike person or a car person. They're actually both. They use a bike in certain circumstances, and they use like a car in other circumstances, depending on like where they need to go, how far it takes them to go, and sort of things like that. So those are some of the issues that were discussed there. And not only did we just sit around just talking for the whole time, but we also got to get up from the tables and socialize with other people. And I learned that there were a lot of people there who were really interested in making a difference in the Boston community and taking action against the climate crisis, specifically in Boston. And when I was leaving, I was very confident that the city of Boston would have answers to the questions being asked by climate change. So 2 days later, on Thursday, I got to learn about a normal day at Tree Eastie. So Bill invited me to Rocky's Urban Wild to help thin trees. At the time, I didn't even know what that even was. From 5 to 8 on Thursday. But like I said, I didn't even know what that was. But I still decided to go just because I figured, hey, I can learn and I can have that knowledge stick with me the whole time whenever I want to go to other tree planting or tree thinning events or any sort of thing like that. So we went to Rocky's Urban Wild, and there were a few people there, and we got to learn about what tree thinning was, and we got to do it ourselves and just talk with people there, kind of like what I've been talking with other people at the other various events about, like how I just moved to Boston, about like their background, how they got involved with these various organizations. However, one thing that piqued my interest at this event was Bill introduced me to, I mean, he didn't introduce me to, but he told me about how Kara, who was one of the people that came to the tree planting event on Sunday, he told me about how Kara was the president of this organization called Eastie Greener and Cleaner, which is like kind of like the plastic pickup campaign I manage, Picking Up Plastic. They just go around East Boston and kind of clean up the area, pick up trash around there for like beautification purposes. And so I talked to her a lot about how she started it, what like upcoming projects and pickups she has, how maybe I might be able to get involved and we might be able to do a sort of joint venture together. So we discussed a lot about that, and that was one of the big reasons I'm glad I came to the tree thinning event. However, the next day was the biggest thing yet. So Kannan told me about it, I think it was Wednesday night? I can't quite remember. But he told me about how the mayor was going to have her annual coffee hour on Friday. So she has this coffee hour at various places around Boston, and she was going to have the East Boston coffee hour that Friday, and I immediately decided that I was going to go because I thought to myself, this could be it. This could be the thing that allows my plastic pickup campaign to really take off and gain presence in Boston. And so that was the main reason I decided to go. I also kind of just wanted to talk to the mayor and see like what she was like, what she was doing to help out the city of Boston through its various issues. And in fact, she gave a speech at the beginning of the climate hour. I mean, not climate hour, sorry, coffee hour about that, about how she was planning to about how she was planning to take action on the climate crisis and how that was happening in Boston, and about with issues such as diversity and as well as the immigration crisis happening. So she was kind of talked to many people living in East Boston about how the city is taking action on various issues like that. So after she finished speaking, I went up to her and I told her about picking up plastic. I introduced myself and I kind of shared my hopes for expanding it in Boston. And I also just told her that I hoped plastic pollution was at the top of her priorities list. However, while I was talking to her, I just began to reflect on just how much I had done in a week. It felt like a lot more than a week when I first met Joel at that Eastie Farm location with the garden walkway, and he had told us about what Eastie Farm had to offer, what the organization does. That felt like it had happened way more than a week ago, when in reality, just over a week after that, I was already talking to the mayor of Boston. And this made me realize that my dad really was right. This is why we moved to Boston. I had already gotten so many opportunities to help out my community and to make a difference in not just East Boston, but the whole city of Boston. But it was then I realized that this was only the beginning. And so I really, really hope that I'll get to have more opportunities as I stay here more in Boston and as the summer goes by. And when I do get more opportunities, like big opportunities, I'll definitely make sure to tell you guys out there all about it and make sure to update you guys on just what I'm doing in Boston in general. However, that is the end of this video. I want to thank you guys for watching and listening to my journey and my first week in Boston and what I've been doing here so far. So I want to make sure that you guys click that subscribe button, click that like button, and click that little bell icon. Once again, thank you guys so much for watching. And remember, dare to dream big.